So Packard is coming back. Yes, the venerated name from American automobile manufacturing from the early 20th century is making a return, at least in a small way and a little bit in the future. So welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I am John, and Packard was at one time considered the American Rolls-Royce. It was exquisitely detailed, durable, reliable, and kings and queens, emperors, the wealthy, entertainers, movers, and shakers bought them. The company survived 2 world wars before eventually succumbing in the 1950s. And there's been a few attempts to bring it back over the years, and I've never paid much attention to them because you hear about these stories about car manufacturers coming back. But there's a couple of guys that seem to have been making it come true. So I've done a whole history of Packard. You might want to check it out. It's a really interesting story. But 2 brothers, James and William, started it in the late 1890s. William had actually bought a Winton automobile and had so many problems with it, he kept complaining to the owner of Winton. And literally, Mr. Winton told him if he thought he could do better, go build his own car. So he and his brother decided they were going to, and in fact, they poached the chief investor for Winton to start their project as well. And in 1899, the first Packard rolled out and quickly gained an excellent reputation. It continued on, and especially through the 30s and then through the war effort into the 40s, they were massively successful. But by the late 40s and into the 50s, they were having problems competing with the much better financed, products from Ford and General Motors. So they had a merger with Studebaker that quickly went sideways, and by the late 50s, Packard was done. But through it all, they actually helped define. They came up with many of the innovations that became standard and used on automobiles that we still see today. I've got a little list of them over here that you can check out. And so it was a massively influential brand that is one of those that I can't believe somebody hasn't actually brought it back. Well, now we fast forward to 2019. A gentleman by the name of Scott Andrews is an internet consultant, and he was driving down the road and saw an interesting looking car for sale on the side of the road. When he pulled over to look at it, he was curious. So he picked up his phone and he called his dad, who had been a mechanic. And the conversation apparently went something like this. Hey, Dad, what's a Packard? And that started him getting massively involved in the history of Packard and really becoming a kind of a burning obsession. Well, a couple of things he found out along the way was, number one, that James Packard had been an aficionado of watches and pocket watches. He liked to commission watches like from Swiss brands. Coincidentally, Andrews is a watchmaker. Now, his main job was something different, but he made watches as a hobby. The other thing is he got his degree from Cleveland State University's James J. Nance Business School, which also happens to be named after the president of Packard. So it seemed like it was meant to be. Now, Scott had a friend, Steve Constantino, who happens to be a chemist. Very successful, holds multiple patents, owns multiple companies, had that business experience, and he brought Steve into his obsession towards Packard, and they started to hatch a plan. Andrews went off and legally acquired the right to all Packard's brands, patents, and trademarks. Together, they found a company in Nebraska that actually made the parts for a Packard car. They went to Medina, Ohio, and found the perfect place, and they set up shop. And they began hand assembling an example of what they could do. Now, they're not designing a new car from the ground up. This is actually a 1934 Packard updated to the modern era. Now, unfortunately, here the details begin to fall apart just a little bit. They have a sample car that they've constructed to get interest, and they're looking at another location to begin manufacturing. They are ready in about 6 months, they say, to start taking orders for these cars, and that they're going to have a myriad of options to customize the car for each individual buyer. Specifically, that it is going to have fully modern, up-to-date engines. But unfortunately, what we don't have right now is a lot of detail about critical things like what kind of engine, what kind of transmission, how many can they build in a year and not have to have cars that meet all of the current safety and emissions requirements. And of course, how the heck much is this going to actually cost? I have a feeling I know, and it's going to be in the multiple six figures to compete with what Rolls-Royce can do, but it's going to look pretty special if it looks anything like the sample they've already got. But what's interesting is they're not just focusing on the car, they're also focusing on some other products. Now, because he's a watchmaker, apparently he has set up his own watchmaking company, which makes, coincidentally, the Packard 1899 commemorative watch, which also happens to sell for $1,899. But they're also setting up apparently an internet service provider under the Packard name as well, promising to keep people's data more secure. So I do feel that maybe they might be going in too many different directions at the same time. There's a lot of unanswered questions, and we're not going to see thousands of new Packards cruising down the highways. This will be extremely rare. But it's exciting that this name hasn't been forgotten, not just among the Packard Museum or Packard aficionados, but that it's actually going to be a living, breathing company again, putting out new products and getting news for itself. I'm going to keep an eye on this one, especially in 2024 and 2025 when probably the first deliveries will be made, because I want to see this succeed. Let me know what you think below, guys. Thanks for being here.